Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our February 2026 Broadcom TAM customer webinar. These sessions are organized by Broadcom TAM specifically for you, our TAM customers, and our goal is to connect you with subject matter experts and insights that ensure you're getting the absolute maximum value out of your VMware by Broadcom software. Before we dive into today's session, a few quick updates and announcements. Mark your calendars. We'll have our next webinar on March the 12th, where we'll explore how to eliminate manual template creation by using Packer and Broadcom open source plugins to automate machine image builds. Your TAM can make those registration details available to you as soon as they become available. And your interaction and input makes these sessions better. So please use the Q&A feature to ask questions. If we don't get to your question live, please reach out to your TAM for a follow-up. When the webinar ends, you should see a brief 2-question survey. Your feedback on the value of this session and what you want to hear next is a huge help to us. We would greatly appreciate you taking the time to complete it. And today's session is being recorded. Your TAM can make the link available to you, shortly after we wrap. And after a few months, the recording will be available on the VMware TAM Services YouTube channel. That brings us to today's speaker and topic. We're thrilled to be joined by Cormac Hogan, a distinguished engineering architect, chief technologist within our VCF product management group, author, blogger, and today he's here to show us how DSM can seamlessly provision databases and data services within VCF. We're incredibly excited to have him here with us today. With that, Cormac, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chris. Good afternoon, good morning, everybody. So yeah, delighted to be here. I'm going to give you the lowdown on Data Services Manager. It's a product that I've been working on now for almost 3 years. So we're starting to see definite ramp up, definite interest from our customers on what we can do. And I'm going to share with you a few different things, things that are sort of work in progress, things that are already available. And so the presentation, I have 3 sections. I was mentioning this to Chris previously. So I'll give you an overview of what DSM can do today, particularly focusing on just the standalone product. We do have a tech preview, as you might be able to see in the intro. We have a tech preview for Microsoft SQL Server, which we're hoping to make available very soon. And then lastly, I'll finish with a section that shows you how this is integrated into VCF 9 and VCF Automation to provide multi-tenancy. So if you did want to offer database as a service to your end users, I show you ways in which you can do that sort of multi-tenancy and doing separation of organizations and users and so on. So let's get into the presentation. So I'm going to focus on 9.02. This is our current version of Data Services Manager. And it does work with VCF, it does work with VCF Automation, but it also works in standalone mode as well. So for those of you who are very new to DSM, what I will show you is all of the building blocks that go together to create a database using DSM. But because I'm sort of at the coalface for a lot of things and working on the next release, I always put this slide up just in case I do a slip of the tongue or something like that and talk about something that may be coming down the line. I'll try to highlight that if I can. There's definitely a few things happening that I want to share with you, but the usual disclaimer may or may not happen at some point in the future. Okay, so let me give you an introduction to DSM. So we're going to start with the basic building blocks. Obviously, you have your vSphere infrastructure built into a vSphere cluster. You will have some vSphere storage, whether that's vSAN, VMFS, NFS, whatever the case may be. Some networking as well. We support distributed port groups with a distributed switch, but you can also use NSX. And then, as I said, you can use this in a standalone mode outside of VCF, but it is also integrated into VCF and VCF Automation as well. So this is our basic vSphere building block. And so what we provide you with is what's known as a plugin to vSphere. So the VI admin will come along, take this plugin, attach it to vCenter. That will roll out an appliance. So it's a single virtual machine appliance. And that provides both an API and a portal or a UI on which to create, manage, and do all of the things that are being listed here on the right-hand side around your database. So once you have DSM installed, it becomes that portal for doing things like lifecycle management. So we have the ability to stage patches for your databases. And during a particular maintenance window, we can roll out the patch across all of your databases for a particular version of a particular patch. The maintenance window is tunable. We have it by default on a Saturday night, Sunday morning, which is usually the quiet period. But as I said, you can tune it yourself. Any of the databases that you roll out, whether it's Postgres, MySQL, or SQL Server, you can configure them, provide lots of different advanced parameters for the database. Typically, anything you would see with a standard standalone database that's been provisioned, you can include it in DSM provision databases. We have scope to do replication, disaster recovery as well, integrated with directory services. So perhaps if you're using Postgres, you might have your users in Open LDAP, for example, with Windows SQL Server. Obviously, Active Directory would play a role, and a bunch of other things like providing custom certificates from the database. Databases are being rolled out to ensure that you have secure communication between different components. We have the ability to do monitoring and alerting, log and metric forwarding as well. Obviously, going forward, our preference would be integration with VCF operations or VCF automation for your different tenants to be able to see metrics and so on a per organization basis. But the idea is that you could send it either to VCF operations, but also to maybe something like Prometheus. So if you're using Prometheus and Grafana, whatever the case may be, absolutely use that as well. And in the demo, I'll show you various capabilities that we can offer around your databases as well. So as I said, we have automated backup. So you can define backup schedules for your databases as well. You can restore those databases as a new instance. And all of those things as well, like such as cloning a database, for example. What we find a lot of customers, they don't actually create databases from scratch. They actually clone an existing database, and that's what they use. So again, all those things on the right-hand side, these are all of the capabilities that we have built into Data Services Manager for the databases that we are provisioning through DSM. So let's go and see a database being created now. So the VI admin's role is twofold. Firstly, it's to get DSM plugged in to your vCenter and vSphere environment. And the second role they have is to put guardrails around these resources so that the databases that are being provisioned are landing into a subset of your vSphere resources. So you're not going to have data sprawl across all of your vSphere infrastructure. We're going to try and land all the databases into a subset of that infrastructure that the VI admin defines. And that has, not only does it prevent the data sprawl, but for instance, for Microsoft SQL Server, for example, they might be licensed, or they probably will be licensed, but what you're trying to do is reduce that licensing around those SQL Server databases. So you could land it onto a particular cluster and just have to license that vSphere cluster for your Microsoft databases instead of having to perhaps license your whole vSphere landscape for SQL Server. So this concept is an infrastructure policy. So this infrastructure policy, like I said, is a subset of resources. So we're taking some vSphere resources, compute resources, could be a cluster, could be a resource pool. You'll take in some data store, could be vSAN, could be VMFS volume, could be NFS. You'll take some networking, it might be a distributed port group, it might be an NSX segment. And all of those go into the infrastructure policy so that any database that is provisioned with this infrastructure policy, you're guaranteed that it's going to land on this infrastructure. So that's the whole goal about guardrailing your resources and not having data sprawl. That's achieved with the infrastructure policy concept. And once that is in place, you can hand the DBAs or your data admins, you can give them access to your DSM portal, and from there they can log in either through the UI or an API, and they can build out a database. So what are we looking at here? So in this particular case, the request from the data admin was to build a clustered Postgres database. So we ended up getting 3 virtual machines. Those 3 virtual machines form a Postgres database cluster. So you have a primary node, a replica node, and a monitor node. And what these do, the monitor node is simply watching to make sure that the primary is still available, it's still healthy, it's still behaving itself. The event of the primary going down, the monitor will kick in and it will do the promotion of that replica to become the new primary. So that in essence is the Postgres cluster. Now, those of you who are well versed in Kubernetes might notice the Kubernetes icon in there. And indeed, this becomes a Kubernetes cluster as well. So essentially what we're doing is we're deploying out 3 virtual machines, we're forming a Kubernetes cluster, we're installing a Postgres operator, and then we're using that Postgres operator to stand up a Postgres database. So hopefully that is sort of making sense. And then the data admin can retrieve what's known as a connection string and can hand that connection string off to the end user so that they can consume the database. So that's one way of provisioning the database. Now, I said that you can do this through the UI, but you can also do it through the API. So your data admin who might be familiar with Kubernetes and YAML manifests could describe their database in a YAML manifest. They can send that to our DSM API server, and that will create a database as well. So for example, my end users might want to have a self-service approach and not have to open tickets with data admins each and every time they want a database. So if you wanted, you could give your end users access to the API server or through ARIA automation. That's what I'm showing in this particular case, because we do support ARIA automation as well, not just VCF automation. And they can go ahead and through the service broker in ARIA automation, they can describe what they like, what type of database they'd want to set up and roll it out again. And note that you can have multiple infrastructure policies as well. So you might have an infrastructure policy for team A, you might have another infrastructure policy for team B, and you can give them their own sets of resources to consume on your vSphere landscape without them stepping on each other and without them creating a data sprawl as well. So last but not least, I'll show you one more database that we support, and that's the SQL Server. Now in 902, we don't have a clustered SQL Server. It's still tech preview, as I mentioned already, but we will have a fully enterprise-ready SQL Server offering in the very near future, and that will include always-on provisioning of your SQL Server databases as well. So in a nutshell, this is what we're offering. I know I've been talking for about 10 minutes straight there, but hopefully that's giving you a flavor of what DSM is, some of the features that we offer. And I think what the next thing I'll do now is I will take this and show you a demo of all of this coming together. Before we do that, I just want to highlight again some of the features of the 3 databases that we have available in 902. So we're spending a lot of time going deep and making these databases enterprise ready. So we don't have a broad range of data services just yet. Our focus is on DBAS, or database as a service, predominantly Postgres and MySQL as open source databases. What we tend to see is there's a lot of interest in Postgres in EMEA. There's a lot of interest in MySQL in the APJ region, and then everybody is interested in SQL Server. So again, SQL Server tech preview. We're working towards making it enterprise ready, and we think in the very near future we'll be able to offer this to you as well. Okay, thank you, Walter. So there was a question. What I'll do is I'll pause at the end of each of these sections. As I said, once I complete the intro section, I'll come back and have a look at the Q&A and just see if there's anything that I need to answer. So now what you're seeing here is a view of a vSphere client that has the DSM plugin already installed. And what you will notice that's different about this is that we've extended the vSphere client to include Data Service Manager specific information. So when I select the vCenter and then the configure view, I have a Data Services Manager, a bunch of menu items related to setting up things like infrastructure policies, things like LDAP integration, Active Directory integration, some users control, all of that good stuff. So let me kick off the demo. And not like that. Let me see if I can play it here. There we go. So I'll just pop into the admin view very quickly and show you under the Solutions Client plugins that I have a Data Services Manager plugin. So this is what we would provide to you. So when you go to install Data Services Manager, you're essentially rolling out a plugin. You'll end up with an appliance, but you'll also end up with the vSphere client extended for Data Services Manager. And the first thing I'm showing you here is the infrastructure policy that I have created, which includes compute, which is cluster B, a vSAN data store for storage. You can see the vSAN data stores are there. Network port groups, in this particular case, I'm using a distributed port group off one of my distributed switches. You can see that there as well. And a few other things I have in here as well. One thing would be the IP pool. So we set aside a range of IP addresses on our distributed port group that we can allocate to the databases that we are creating, and then some housekeeping around VM folders, and lastly, some VM classes, which describe the size of the virtual machines that we're going to create. This now is the DSM portal. I'm going to skip over a bunch of the RBAC stuff, basically what users are allowed to provision, what databases. There is a whole RBAC setup in there, but we're just going to go ahead and create a Postgres database off the bat, just to kind of keep things a little bit simple. So you can see I have various versions. We support up to 5 versions of Postgres, 5 major versions going back to 13. You will just give the instance and database a name, give the username, an admin username and password, decide if you want to integrate, in this case with LDAP, then provide a DNS name if you so wish as well. And then the certificate management. So we provide certificates as well. They're kind of sub-signed DSM certificates for communication. But if you wanted to provide your own secure certificates, you can. We get onto topology then. So we support single server. We support clustered on the same vSphere cluster. So 3 nodes on the same vSphere cluster. Or if you had enough infrastructure, you could actually deploy across multiple vSphere clusters as well. The infrastructure policy details, you're just fine-tuning your infrastructure policy now, selecting the size of the nodes, the disk size, deciding whether you want a maintenance window for the automated update of patching. We also have this concept of vSphere tags. So all the databases we roll out, they'll have a vSphere tag associated with them, which can be very useful for billing purposes or ownership determination, that kind of thing. Database options are there. Host-based access control is there as well, deciding which users can access the database from which network. So all the kind of things that if you were using Postgres on a daily basis, you'd be familiar with. So I just been speeding things along here, get the database rolled out, and we have a full view of the database here now, all of the information that we provided during the setup. The topology, so eventually, because this is a little bit soon, but the virtual machine name and everything will eventually populate in here after a few moments. Are there any upgrades available? Any upgrades staged? Any vSphere tags? Just popping out to the vSphere client, and you can see that the tag that I associated with that database node is visible in the tags view. Yeah, and just going back, what else have we got in here? So again, let's have a look at the, I think we're going to try and connect to the database. Yeah, so I just copied the connection string previously. So I'm just going to show you very quickly that we can just do a pSQL using a pSQL client, connect to the database, provide the connection string, and you're in, and you can just run whatever DBAs do inside in the database. We have some built-in monitoring as well. Now I said we have plugins that will go to ARIA operations, also VCF operations, or we can send metrics out to Prometheus as well. And there's other things here. I know it's going a little bit quickly, but I'm just showing you things like we can take on-demand backups as well of the database. What else can we do here? Yeah, so there's an on-demand backup of a previous database. We're just going to take very quickly an on-demand backup as well of our new database. There you go. There is already a backup schedule, so we do a full backup weekly, we do incremental daily, and the write-ahead logs for point-in-time recoveries are all written as well. So you can do a point-in-time recovery at any time. And for DR purposes as well, we have some workflows like blocking connections to primary database, promoting a secondary to primary, demoting a primary to secondary. All of that good stuff is built in. So I will pause there for a second, and hopefully that demo, along with the what I explained just previously in the building block slide, has given you a good flavor now about how we do Postgres and databases in general. Because as you'll see when we do Microsoft SQL Server in the next section, it looks very much similar. The same look and feel. So anybody who is a data admin within your organization who might be using this DSM portal, they don't necessarily need to know the inside, Postgres inside out, MySQL inside out, SQL Server inside out. It's the same look and feel as they roll out the databases, selecting infrastructure policies, selecting topologies, and so on. So another question here, when we're talking about a Microsoft SQL Server database, are you talking about a SQL Server instance running on a VM? Are you talking about a database running in a SQL Server instance? That's a very good point. So why don't we get on to that, Vander, and you will see in a little bit more detail. Oh, Jason asks, can you schedule backups or do they have to be on demand? No, so there is a schedule as well. Typically, the on-demand is like if you're going to do some maintenance work on the database, or you might want to do an upgrade, you might want to take an on-demand backup. But like I said, there are scheduled backups as well. And for Postgres, it's again all tunable, but it's weekly full, daily incremental, and then the wall write-ahead logs, and those things are shipped out to the backup location. I think it's when they reach a 16 meg threshold or a 5 minute threshold, whichever one you reach first. So you can always do a restore from the scheduled backups as well. So you have both scheduled and on demand. Good. Okay, so let's go and have a look at Microsoft SQL Server. Note down in the bottom right-hand corner, this is tech preview, but we've been adding tech previews for the last 3 versions now, I think. And the next major release, we should be going generally available with this data service. So the question that Rhonda just asked was, are we dealing with instances, which is essentially your SQL Server engine, or are you dealing with databases, which are databases that have been provisioned from the instance? So we've had a few early adopters, customers who have been giving us a lot of guidance on how to do SQL Server instances, SQL Server databases as a service. And so what we've heard from those customers, and it seems to be a uniform concept, let's say, is that customers have a few very large SQL Server instances, and then for their end users, what they do is they provision databases from these instances for the end users. Now, it varies slightly in that in some customers, there's a data admin who's responsible for doing the provisioning of the databases and handing them off to the end users. But there's also customers who allow self-service. So they have end users or consumers of the databases able to provision those SQL Server databases for themselves. So that's what we're hearing, and that's the implementation that we've gone towards. And again, I'll show you some slides around that. But a lot of the other features that we have in here are almost identical to what I just showed you from a Postgres perspective. So you can build your custom certs, you can do your backup schedules, you can set your maintenance windows for staged updates or patches. We have integration with Active Directory. We have advanced configuration settings for the database, auditing, so you can monitor for all logins or perhaps failed logins. Support for SQL Server agent. This was a requirement that came up multiple times because a lot of customers use the SQL Server agent to schedule jobs. Like one, for example, would be a database consistency checker jobs. Um, Another job, a common one, is backups, running backups through the SQL Server agent. But because we're doing that at DSM, that's a bit moot. But definitely the database consistency checker run as a job through the SQL Server agent is a common one as well. And so again, cloning and backup and restoring of the databases is there, and then easy connection with a connection string, all there as well. So let me show you how we go about setting that up. So first and foremost, what you can do is you can connect your to an Active Directory domain. This is very important for basically Windows authentication. So you can have two different types of SQL Server access, one using Windows authentication and the other one using SQL Server authentication. But if you wanted to do Windows authentication, you would need to be connected to an Active Directory domain. Now, there's another interesting thing down here towards the end is this privileged account username and password. What this privileged account, if you allow DSM to do so, what we'll be able to do is we'll be able to add what are known as service principal names to the owner of the database so that they can manage that database and give different users access to the database using Windows authentication. If you don't give DSM the ability to do this, then it's a matter of maybe scripting it or a manual approach so that the owner of the database gets allocated what are known as these SPNs, service principal names. It's all internals to Windows Active Directory and so on. But what we're saying is that if you create this privileged account and you give DSM this privileged account, we will take care of making sure that the owner of the database has sufficient privileges to be able to manage that database and grant other users access, Windows authentication access to the different databases that are being created on this instance. So hopefully that makes sense. Again, if you're not really a SQL Server DBA, some of this SPN type of stuff might not make sense, but it's basically a way of automating the whole process through DSM. So this is, again, going through, there'll be a lot of familiarity here now to what we saw in Postgres, but what we're doing is we're selecting a version of SQL Server to roll out, selecting an instance name, selecting an edition. Nice thing about this is the developer edition of SQL Server, even though it doesn't give you an awful lot of resources that you can consume. It's quite, it's quite tight on what it's letting you do. It means you can provision the databases without actually having to have a SQL Server license, which is quite good. So we have a number of different editions, but you would have to bring your own licenses to use any of these other editions, just so you know that. We're not in the business of managing your Microsoft SQL Server licenses. We expect you to bring your own. Now, notice that there's a SQL Server Active Directory account username that we're associating with the instance here. If we've already set up the privileged user in Active Directory, we can give this user Paudie the necessary privileges to manage all of the users and all of the databases that are being created on this instance. Another nice thing as well is that privileged user that you created previously, you can get them to update the DNS for the instance and the database and so on as well. So you can actually write the DNS names into your DNS within your domain controller too. So again, all we're trying to do here is automate all of the steps so you don't have to do any manual steps once everything has been set up. Infrastructure policy, very similar to what we saw with Postgres. Same thing applies here. How big are we going to create the virtual machines that are going to run our database? I'm not really out of the ordinary of that one. And then some specific things again, we saw with Postgres that there was advanced parameters that we could set. We could also set host-based access controls determining who can access the database from which network. From a SQL Server perspective, the kind of configuration we can do is enabling the agent and do advanced parameters like trace flags, settings for the mssql.conf, collation, that kind of thing, enabling the auditing for logins. All of that can be done here. Maintenance window, same as Postgres. When do we roll out the patches or any updates that have been staged? And then the vSphere tagging is also available here as well for SQL Server. Same as we saw with Postgres. And here we go. This is the instance. Again, this looks like what we saw in the demo, but this time it's a SQL Server cluster, SQL Server database. You can see that we've set up a special admin user that can access the master database. And this would be the user, this would be the instance owner, let's say, and that user party that we used previously. But anyway, yeah, you can see the replication. In this case, it's single server. You can see the infrastructure that's been used. You can see the Active Directory integration. All of that stuff is in here. Okay. So how do we connect to the instance? So let's see that. You know what? This just looks like any other SQL Server. So you could use something like SQL Server Management Suite, like you're seeing here. I think there's also an Azure Management Suite as well, a more recent one. But the idea here is that you will just be able to connect as an SA user. It is not really an SA user. It is a very privileged user, but a best practice is actually to disable the SA user on SQL Server instances. So that's what we're doing here. We're logging in as that DSM admin. And once we're connected, you see all of the system databases. So there's all available to that DSM admin user that we created on the database. Good. So I can see a couple of questions. I will come back to them in just a moment. But once we have the database, once we have the instance or the engine created, we can come back to DSM. And now what we can start doing as a data admin from within DSM is we can start building individual databases for our different users. So again, I could have multiple instances. I just have one here, but you can see multiple instances. You can see the instance that I've chosen in this particular case, and I'm selecting which database name I want to create on this instance. And now I can get in and I can say this Active Directory user will become will use Windows authentication to access the database. All right. So again, this is me as a data admin using the DSM portal to provision new databases from the existing SQL Server engine and giving these to different teams, perhaps different users in different teams, and so on. And now if I connect to the database that I just created, I can no longer connect to the master. I can't connect to any of the system databases. What I have to do is with SSMS, I would have to connect to the database that's being created. And here you go. You can see me logging in as that Windows auth user, this Active Directory user, Cormac, connecting to the instance, but this time in the connection properties, I can only get access to one of the databases. I wouldn't be allowed to connect if I try to access the system database, and now I can just work on my own database. So again, what we've done is we're allowing the data admin within your organization to create the instance and then provision databases on a per user basis and give those databases to individual users. So I think just to highlight again that this is tech preview. We do hope to have it generally available very soon. Thing to highlight once again that you may not have noticed is that this is SQL Server for Linux. So we are again doing what we did for Postgres. We're creating virtual machines. We're putting a Kubernetes cluster on top of that. And then we're provisioning SQL Server for Linux in containers running on top of that as well. But for all intents and purposes, to the end users, they're just using the tools that they've been using all along for hosting or interacting with SQL Server. It's completely transparent to them. So let me just take a few questions then. So again, Rhonda says we have customers that want to maintain their own SQL Server, but also a lot of teams that just want a single MS database. So yeah, I think you can do both of those approaches. Hopefully that's clear now, Rhonda, that you could absolutely do that. So you could have a data admin who is in DSM in the portal, or actually through the API provisioning these individual databases, but you could also create users within DSM where you can allocate them to different namespaces. Now, I didn't go through the RBAC of DSM in a lot of detail, but essentially you could have individual administrators, data administrators, users within DSM working on different areas, giving them access to different components. In your case, it could be access to different SQL Server engines or SQL Server instances, and they wouldn't step on each other. They would be multi-tenanted through DSM and the namespace concept there as well. So I think you could achieve exactly what you wanted to do, giving some of your end users, customers, access to the full SQL Server instance, and then for other owners or other customers that you have, giving them access just to individual databases. So can I manage replication for SQL Server and or AG? This is a request from Brian. So we don't have always on availability just yet, Brian. I think if that's what you're asking. So we will have that when we release the product in full. So as I said, we're building step by step, adding in each release new features. I'm not 100% sure what you mean about managed replication, but initially we will be creating, or we'll be giving you the option to once again create either a single standalone SQL Server engine, which is based on a single VM, or a clustered always on, which would be 3 nodes of SQL Server. Readable secondary, that's a very good question. I'm not sure if the secondary is just there as a failover. So we've had a lot of debate about whether we should make replicas read-only, especially in the context of Postgres, because what we want to do is make sure that there's no impact to performance when there is a failover. So definitely in Postgres, what we do have is basically a replica that is not doing is not taking any of the IO load or not taking any of the reads, definitely. So essentially, if you lost the primary, the secondary would come up. You'd get exactly the same. You get exactly the same performance. If we were to do read replicas, and then there was a failure of the primary, then that read replica would take a hit in performance because now it's dealing with the workload across two of the replicas, I guess, the primary and the replica, and now it's just having to do that on its own. So there's a kind of debate about it. Some customers are asking us about it as well. So I think we probably could have a longer debate about that, about how we want to do things and whether we should set up additional read replicas. But it's a very good question, and we'd love to, maybe have a conversation about that in more detail with you. Wonder, I'm not sure about SSIS and SSAS, I'm afraid. Could try and maybe answer that offline for you at some other point. Can we deploy failure cluster? No, it's always on, Rajesh. We're keeping away from the failover clusters, and we're just going to do always on at least in the initial release when we bring it out. Then Brian has another one. We replicate to a third party for read only. Oh, I see. Okay. That's an interesting use case. So I will capture that and I'll take it back to our product managers and engineering team and just say something to think about. Thanks, Brian. Very good. So we have 20 minutes left. I did want to show you the VCF automation integration. Now, for those of you who looked at VCF 9 and who have looked at VCF automation, you see there's a lot of building blocks associated with this. So there's organizations. Within organizations, you have this concept of projects. Within this concept of projects, you have this concept of namespaces. So there's like lots of different building blocks to achieving multi-tenancy in VCF automation. So we could be here for the next hour explaining all of those. So what I'm going to say to you is I'm going to basically have skipped over a bunch of these things just to get you to the DSM and the database DBAs integration part of this. So this looks very similar to the opening slide that I had with the building blocks on the standalone DSM. But now if we take this into VCF 9, VCF automation, as I said, there's a bunch of other building blocks to consider like regions, organizations, projects, and namespaces. But having said that, we still attach the DSM plugin to your vCenter server. So your vCenter server will still have all of the features that we saw previously, except now we can connect VCF automation to our DSM appliance as well. We still create infrastructure policies. You can continue to use the infrastructure policy we saw previously, which was built on vSphere infrastructure. But when you're in VCF and VCF automation and you have a supervisor created, you can actually carve out a namespace, a vSphere namespace, and use the resources on that vSphere namespace for provisioning your databases. So subtly different. You could still absolutely continue to use the DSM managed infrastructure policies if you wish, but you can also now use vSphere namespace resources. So the data admin comes in again and could be through VCF automation, could be through DSM, whatever the case may be. There is a request now to stand up a database. It's still using Kubernetes. If it's a clustered database that has been requested, it'll still be 3 nodes, but now we're using the vSphere Kubernetes Service, the VKS, to stand up that Kubernetes cluster to host our database for us. Okay, so subtly different, but again, this is all part of integrating with the VCF stack. Can absolutely still do the self-service. We still have full-blown API. There is a component that we call a custom operator that we use with consumption operator, to be more exact, that we use with the supervisor. And it basically extends the supervisor API to include the DSM API. And you can, again, just describe your YAML manifest of the database that you want to provision, send it up to the API server, and it'll roll out the database for you. And I'm just going to kind of get ahead of myself a little bit here to show you what our vision is, in that you'll be able to roll out all of these different databases in a clustered mode very shortly. So again, all of the features you're seeing here on the right-hand side, we're carrying all of those into VCF automation. And so when you go through VCF automation and you request a database, pretty much all of the type of features that you saw on DSM standalone, whether it's selecting virtual machine classes, whether it's custom certificates, whether it's a backup schedule, maintenance window, all of those things are included in the VCF automation approach as well. Okay, so like I said, we could be here for the next hour or two showing you all the different ways of connecting and setting up VCF automation for DSM. So a bunch of things I'm just skipping through is a lot of it to do with RBAC again. So firstly, obviously, I needed to connect VCFA to DSM. They need to trust each other. That's quite straightforward to do. You're just putting in the URL of DSM into VCFA and agreeing to the certificate and establishing trust. But again, a lot of the RBAC stuff I'm skipping over. So within VCF automation, I mean, it's It's basically set up for multi-tenancy. You have all these different organizations within VCFA, and basically what you can do is you can say this organization is allowed to provision Postgres, uh, Postgres version onto this vSphere namespace, but this completely different organization is allowed to provision SQL Server, and they would provision onto a completely different namespace, and you get the idea. Okay, you get the idea. So again, I want to highlight you can continue to use the original DSM managed infrastructure policies that we saw at the very beginning, which is just generic vSphere resources. But now that we're integrated with VCF Automation, we can also have a supervisor namespace as our resource entity as well. Last but not least, when you log in as a tenant, you go to your tenant organization. There's a bunch of services that a tenant is allowed to consume, and one of those services will now be databases. So yeah, all of this would take a long time to set up, so I'm just going to go straight into it and show you another demo. But I'll show you the building block approach of what we're trying to do first. So again, nothing really to highlight too much here. For those of you who are not familiar with VCF or VCF automation, you do have this construct of a region, which is essentially a bunch of resources that could span multiple supervisors, multiple vSphere clusters, etc., etc. What I'm going to do is I'm going to build a tenant organization, and within that tenant organization, I will have a tenant project. So this is where my organization users will land. And what I've also done as a provider admin, and this is the way we envision DSM being consumed in VCF automation going forward, is that we also build a dedicated DSM organization. Within that dedicated DSM organization, we will create a project. And then within that project, we could have one or more namespaces. And these namespaces are where the tenant databases are going to land. So again, there's a lot of benefits for doing it this way. It just means that there's a particular organization or namespace that holds all of your databases. You don't have a data sprawl across all of your vSphere infrastructure once again, or your VCF infrastructure. Very useful again for licensing purposes. So with third parties like Microsoft SQL Server, you'll be able to corral the nodes or the resources where the Microsoft SQL Server databases and instances are being provisioned onto, and so on. And even from a provider perspective, a VI admin perspective, everything is being kept in one place. So you just have to monitor and manage this one organization for all of your databases. With that said, the organization user is not aware of where this is being provisioned. They just want a database. They come in and they request the database to be created. The database is stood up, but they retrieve the YAML manifest. They can retrieve the connection string. They get all of that good information about the database in their own tenant namespace. All right, so let's keep going with the demo. So for those of you who haven't seen a VCF automation before, this again is a 902 flavor of it. And let's see it all in the works. So this is, I'm logged in as a provider admin here. You can see I might have a few data services. Let's have a look at those. So I have set up a connection to DSM. You can see it there. The connection is in place and associated with a particular region. And I have set up some data service policies as well, which is essentially allowing tenants in different organizations to deploy databases. In this case, it's just Postgres. So you can see here that this particular tenant or any of the users within that organization is allowed to provision a database, and those databases will be sent off to this dedicated DSM namespace called DBAs NS. Okay, so let's see if I have some organizations. I do. As I said, I have this dedicated provider organization that has been set up, and this is where I'm going to land all of the databases that are provisioned through VCF automation. Again, lots of building blocks. There's organizations, there's projects, like you see here. Within the project, there's a namespace, and a namespace would have the resources, right? So the namespace is the entity that has compute, that has all the various information associated with it. So let's go back now to the tenants. Let me go to this particular tenant here. And again, I will launch the organization portal for that tenant. And so there's a lot of different things here, such as build and deploy, manage and govern, and so on. But under the build and deploy, you can see the different services that are available. And one of these services that are available to this user is the ability to create a database. And now what you're seeing is VCFA provisioning a database almost exactly like we were provisioning a database within the DSM portal that we saw earlier. But now we're in VCF automation. Again, selecting an infrastructure policy. This time the infrastructure policy is a supervisor namespace. This time the VM classes are references to the supervisor namespace. Disk size can also be set. Backup and maintenance, same as before. You might want to not do backups or enable maintenance. Perhaps this is just a throwaway database for a quick test. Who knows? And you can get a summary as well. And now you can select create the database. And here you have the YAML manifest representing that database. This can be retrieved at any time and can be reused for the creation of more databases through the API at any point. We still have the DSM appliance. Like I said to you, this still plays a role. It's still connected to vCenter, and we can still monitor everything that is going on through that appliance. Same as in the vSphere client, we're still standing up a database, but now we're using VKS, vSphere Kubernetes Service, which is why you see that representation of a VKS cluster there. And we move quickly along. The database has rolled out. And now the end user is still back in my organization. I can get the YAML manifest. I can copy the connection string that I saw previously. I can see all sorts of information like the infrastructure, the backup configuration, all of that. And just to prove to you once again that this actually works, we can connect to the database. We can have a look at some things within the database. We're all good. So that was just to show you what we're doing going forward. Obviously, there is a big push to bring everybody up to speed on VCF, especially VCF 9. And we're no different in the DSM space. We're integrating all of the different databases, the Postgres, the MySQLs, and the SQL servers. We're integrating all of those into VCFA. So you have the choice. You can still do things standalone, but going forward, VCF customers with VCF automation who require multi-tenancy, who require DBAs for their different tenants, we think DSM is a great solution for that. So next steps. How can you learn more? So a few things here. It'd be remiss of me if I didn't promote my own blog. So I have been doing an awful lot of work on DSM over the last couple of years, and you can find them all there. We do have a hands-on lab. I believe it is based on either version 901 or 902. So if you wanted to go through these workflows for yourself, I think you all have access to those hands-on labs. There's a link and a QR code there as well. And if you're interested in learning more about DSM, you just want to talk to us on maybe a one-to-one basis, feel free to fill out the survey here. We have our product managers watching for any new requests that are coming in, and we can help you get stood up. For instance, if you had a lab environment of your own and you just wanted to see it working, we have teams who are available to help you just stand it up, have a look at it, try it out. No obligation, and just see whether it's we meet your needs as well. Vander is asking about scalability, greater than 25 terabyte databases. So I'm trying to think if I have that number off the top of my head, but there is definitely a DSM section in the configuration maximum guide, Vander. And if you don't find the answer to, maximum size of database, maximum number of disks, maximum size of disks. If you don't get an answer, please reach out to me directly. I'm easy to find on social media, LinkedIn question or something like that. Happy to take that. Or you know what? Reach out to your TAM. Your TAM knows how to reach out to me, and we'll get an answer for you as well. That might be a better approach. So we have a few minutes left, I think. I hope I've given you a good flavor. My pleasure, Vander. I hope I've given you a good flavor of what DSM can do. As I said, we expect to make a major announcement very soon about the SQL Server being generally available. A lot of customers very interested. A lot of customers helped us sculpt it and make it what it is. Some of those early adopters, early access customers giving us various feedback. So yeah, I okay. So Alex asks the question here: do DSM instances have a one-to-one relationship with vCenter? In other words, in VCF 9, would there be a dedicated instance per workload domain? So it's more a dedicated instance per region at the moment, but actually that just changed. So you're right, it would be connected to a single vCenter, but a region construct within VCF automation can have multiple vCenter servers. I'm pretty sure you can, multiple supervisors, and now you can have multiple DSM instances as well. So the overarching construct, Alex, is the region within VCF automation, and then you can have multiple DSMs participate in that region. I think that hopefully that makes sense. Um, I still struggle sometimes with all of the different building blocks that go around VCF automation as well. So hopefully that's given you yeah, it would be. It would. So the DSM would be associated with the different vCenter servers. And you, as I said, the RBAC is a little bit, I won't say complicated, but it's a little bit involved. But the RBAC allows you to say this organization is allowed to provision these databases and these versions of databases within a particular organization. So there is, I said, the RBAC is quite involved, but you have that smarts there to be able to say this end user within this organization would be provisioning these databases to a particular endpoint, which would be a dedicated DSM organization as well. I hope that makes sense. But again, we could absolutely be delighted to do like a one-on-one. So again, if you wanted to reach out to your TAM, who could then reach out to my extended team, we can give you more details on that. Do you support Postgres extensions like PG? Yeah, absolutely. Husband. So the question is Postgres extensions like PG Vector. So PG Vector is one of the databases used for Gen AI, and actually the our AI solution that name escapes me, but our own in-house AI solution that we offer to our customers that actually uses DSM to build PG vector databases. Actually, Chris, help me out. What is the product name that I'm looking for? And I just cannot find. Do you know the
Private AI with NVIDIA?
Yeah,
private? Thank
private
you.
AI.
Yes, thank you, Andy. Yeah, that's the one. So our private AI, and I don't know why I couldn't think of that, but it's using DSM to make these PG vector databases. Yeah. And so if you want to, yeah, there is a whole bunch. I think there's like 70 or 80 different extensions that are in the Postgres that we provide, and you can just enable any of those fully supported. Cool. So any more questions, or I think we might be done. Okay. Well,
Yeah.
it just remains for me to thank you for your time, folks, and I hope you got something out of the presentation.
Yeah, I think we're good. If any more questions come in, we'll take a look at them. Cormac, really appreciate you taking the time to do this and diving into DSM. It's definitely interesting, and we can tell from the Q&A, it definitely highlighted at least, I don't know, I'm thinking of one key use case with, I think, replicating and all of that. So I'll just like to mention again to all of our attendees, we encourage you to reach out to your TAM to continue the conversation, especially if we couldn't get to your question today or if you need to take anything offline. Also, as a reminder, we've recorded today's session. Your TAM will share the link with you as soon as it's available, and we hope to see you all again on March the 12th, where we'll dive into using Packer to automate your machine image builds. Cormac, thank you again for this. This was awesome. To everyone on the call, thank you for joining us today, and have a great
My pleasure.
rest of your week.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
One more question, I think, if we have
Oh,
time.
oh, awesome.
Yeah, from Samson, when you were talking about a MS SQL database, are you talking about SQL Server instance running on a VM, or are you talking about database running a SQL Server instance? We're talking about both, Samson. You could do it both ways. So we can provision instances, and once the instance has been provisioned, you can go ahead and provision databases off that instance. So we support both approaches.
Yep, great
And
question.
with that, top of the hour. Okay.
Yeah, there
Thanks,
we are.
Chris.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you again for doing this. Thanks everyone on the call. Have a great rest of the week.